Hi, and welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist on Facebook Live, where we answer, or try to answer, common questions about atheism and state-church separation. I'm Dan Barker. I'm co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces this weekly show. This is our first show of 2019. We had a few weeks of respite while our main studio is being expanded and remodeled, and I think in a week or two we'll be back in the main studio. This is our temporary studio on the 4th floor of Free Thought Hall here in Madison, Wisconsin, which Bruce Johnson so eloquently and beautifully set up for us today.
And I'm Amit Pal, Director of Communications at FFRF, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which works to keep religion and government separate and to educate the public about the views of non-theists.
Today we're going to talk about morality. How to be good, whether you believe in God or not. How can you be good? If you have a question during today's show, you can ask it right here on Facebook, or you can send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org.
So today's show is called Mere Morality because, Dan, that's the title of the book that you have just written. It came out just a few months ago.
Just last month.
That's last month. And we'll start with this incredible anecdote that you have, Dan, in the book, that in some ways led you to write the book. Can you talk to us about saving a baby, no less, and how that led to the reverie, which in turn led to you, as I said, in many ways, to write the book?
Yeah, so back in 1988, I was flying to New York City to be a guest on the Phil Donahue Show. I think a lot of our viewers would know about the Phil Donahue Show, a big daytime talk show. And it was a show about the afterlife. And so I was changing planes in Detroit. And it was different back then in the 80s. The airports, you know, were totally different before 9/11. And I was waiting in line to get on the connecting flight to go to New York City. And there was another flight next to ours going somewhere else, I don't know where, and there was a line over there. And this young couple, they, you know, just barely newlywed they looked like, very young. They had their luggage on this luggage rack, you know, about this high off the ground. And on top of the luggage, they had a little baby in a baby carrier. And I wasn't really, like, paying much attention. I think I glanced, you know, it was very crowded then. And the father must have walked away for some reason. And I was just sort of looking at the gate, and the corner of my eye saw that baby kick and that baby carrier rolling off the luggage to this hard floor. And before I even thought or analyzed or anything, my left arm just reached out and my legs went, and I caught the edge of that thing as it was rolling, and I just barely caught it with my fingertips. And then the mother, she grabbed the other side about a second later. She would have been too late. I mean, it was going to happen. And we were both holding onto this baby carrier, and I said, that was scary. My heart was beating, and suddenly, just out of nowhere, this instinctive thing that we do, and I kind of felt like, you know, I didn't know those people.
Sure.
I don't know if I would have liked them. You know, they might have been Republicans. Who knows? They might have, who knows? Or they might have been Democrats, or who knows what they might have been. Yeah. But I couldn't help it. And then after a few seconds, I realized I should give the baby back to the mother. You know, I mean, she was like, so I gave the baby back. And then a few minutes later, they went through the jet bridge. They went on through, and just as they were disappearing, she turned around and she just looked at me. She didn't have any expression. She just looked straight at me, and then she went. And I think she was like saying, thank you, maybe, or maybe she was wondering, was that an angel?
Yeah.
That saved my baby out of nowhere? You should have seen the look she gave her husband, though. I mean, you know, because
I can imagine.
Well, yeah. So anyway, she might have told this story to the child later. You know, that child's probably what, in his 20s or 30s now. Yeah. About the angel in the airport, and didn't realize that the angel was an atheist. I didn't believe in God. Yeah. I wasn't standing there in line thinking, how can I bring glory to God? Or what can I do today to be a moral person? Sure. Or how can I show the world that atheists are good people? None of that. It was not rational. It was not, there was no thinking about it. It was just an instinctive thing. And you would have done the same thing.
Sure.
I mean, any of us would have done the same thing, just instinctively. Yeah. We would have done a good act. And I mean, there was some risk. You know, what if the floor was wet, or what if I did something? You know, what if I contributed to the injury? I
Yeah.
could have got sued.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
But there was no time to even think
Sure.
about any of that. So that got me to thinking that at least some of our actions, not all of them, are motivated by things that are below the level of what you might call moral philosophy.
Sure.
You know, like analyzing I wasn't analyzing the merits of acting versus the consequences of not acting, and what is the grand scheme of none of that. There was none. It was just a basic animal, biological thing to happen. And I think we've all had experiences like that in our life. And I got to thinking, well, is that what it means to be good, or is that a part of what it means to be good? And so I tell that story because I think we can all relate to that in some way or another.
And you've talked about instinct, and we'll get to that in a bit, because that's one of the foundations of morality as you perceive it and as you talk about in the book. But let's first start off with the title, Mere Morality. Where did you get the title from, and how do you define morality?
Okay, so Mere Morality is the title, and I think a lot of viewers will get it, because I am mimicking another book written by a Christian theologian and author, C.S. Lewis. He wrote a book.
The Narnia, the author who's famous for the Narnia series.
Yeah, the Narnia series and a bunch of other things. He wrote Screw Tape Letters and The Great Divorce. But his most famous book that Christians really love, which I used to read when I was a Christian minister, is called Mere Christianity. And in Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis attempted to strip Christianity down, because it's a huge thing. There's all these denominations and sects and different interpretations. He wanted to strip it down to the mere, to the core. Like if you peel off all the layers of the onion, what's left? What's the real basic? What's the Christianity that all Christians share, regardless of their denominational differences in that? So I don't think he succeeded, by the way. It was a great attempt. So I decided to do the same thing with the whole idea of morality, because morality can be a big, complicated thing, and there's all these disagreements and all these variances. So what is the basic core of morality if you strip away all the non-essentials? And C.S. Lewis would not have agreed with me that religion is one of those non-essential, discretionary things that should be stripped away from morality. He wouldn't have agreed with that.
Certainly.
But at least he would have agreed with my approach. I was doing the same thing with morality that he was trying to do with Christianity. So that's why the title is that.
And so what is morality, Dan, according to you?
Okay, so I think you don't need God to be good, obviously. You don't need religion to be good. And sometimes I think religion gets in the way, makes it harder to be good. So what do we mean by morality? We basically mean, how should we treat each other? How should I treat you? How should you treat me? What is the good way to treat human-to-human behavior? We don't think about morality too much when you're looking at non-human, although we should maybe, animals and the environment and all that. But morality is a word that we usually reserve for human behavior to other human beings. And there's also the word ethics, and I think roughly you can treat them as synonyms, although ethics is like the theory and morality is the practice. Sure. So they're the same thing, but the ethics is the study of morality and behavior. So I think you don't need a religious framework. I think as long as you can offer at least one coherent, natural or secular idea of morality, then you don't need religion. And what I present in this book is that to be a moral person, you are acting with the intention of minimizing harm.
Yeah.
And I think all systems of morality come down to that one word. If you want to summarize morality in one word, it's the word harm. Is it harming or isn't it? Or what causes more harm, what causes less harm? And when you think about it, harm is natural.
Yeah.
Harm is material. Harm is, well, what is it? Disease, hunger, thirst, lack of shelter, harm is causing pain to others,
Sure.
war, illness, you name it. You could probably make a list of 100 or 200 things that would count as harm in somebody's life in some way. And so morality is the effort with the intention of lessening that overall harm. That's what I call it.
And you postulate in your book that morality has three foundations. You've talked a bit about the first one, instinct. and then there is reason and law. Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, so I don't know if foundation is the right word. I call them guides.
Sure.
Like, I think morality is a compass.
Yeah.
And a compass, what does a compass do? A compass, in fact, the compass is on the front cover of the book. A compass doesn't tell you where to go. It actually doesn't even tell you where you are. It just tells you where north is, right? So that compass, I think that north is lessening harm. If you think of morality as you want to have a world with less harm in it, think of north as less harm. So in order to get there, you need some guides. You need a guide to help you, right? And so sometimes in order to go north, the terrain is very difficult. Sometimes you have to go east or west a while to get to go north. Sometimes you even have to go south for a while to go north. So sometimes you have to cause some harm to minimize overall harm. And we all know that, like you might have to amputate a limb to save a life. I mean, that's really a harmful thing to do.
Sure.
So I think there are 3 guides, as you asked, that don't mechanically produce morality, but 3 guides that we use. And have you ever seen one of those pictures where, like a cartoon character, where there's a devil on one shoulder and there's this angel on the other shoulder, and they're looking back and the guy's looking back and forth? There's an image
Certainly,
right there.
yeah, with Homer Simpson.
Homer Simpson.
Yeah.
There's an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other, and you're looking back and forth. What should I do? Should I do what I want, or should I do what I should? So I think we can replace that silly image, because there are no devils and angels.
Sure.
You know, that's a metaphor. I think we can replace that with picture on this shoulder instinct, and picture on this shoulder law, and in the middle, the brain that is actually working is reason. And that's what I call the 3 moral minds: instinct, law, and reason. And to kind of mimic the Bible, now abideth instinct, law, and reason, but the greatest of these is reason. So instinct is a guide. It's not always perfect. Sometimes instinct tells you to do the wrong thing. And sometimes instinct fires wrong because it evolved in an environment that no longer exists, and now we are in a new environment, and the instinctive thing to do might be the wrong thing to do. And the only way to know that is to use reason, to analyze it, if you have time.
Sure.
When the baby was falling, there was no time.
Yeah.
But if you have time, if you have a few minutes or a few days or a few months to think about what to do, then you're going to use reason to analyze the instinct to see if it's a good or bad one. Often, the instinct is right. So instinct is a guide, and so is law a guide. And I call them minds, 3 moral minds, because obviously your reason is a mind, it's your own mind. But instinct is the result of the minds of your ancestors. The ancestors who cared less about catching falling babies were less likely to pass their genes down to us.
Sure.
And so we inherited from our ancestors who made those decisions in their minds, we inherited that instinct today. And law is also the result not of a single mind, but of a collective mind of society. So instinct and law on your shoulders are what you might call prejudgment. It happened before. Prejudgment, like a head start judgment, right?
Sure.
Whereas reason in the middle is current active judgment. So, Freud's model, the id, the ego, and the superego. Freud thought we were fighting against the id, and he didn't think it was like a devil. And my model is a little bit like that, although Freud thought the id was a bad thing that we need to control.
Yeah.
And I think instinct and law, they're more like well-meaning friends who you want to consult but not always obey.
Sure.
You call somebody on the phone, what should I do? And they give you advice and you appreciate it, but you may not follow it. So I think instinct and law are really good friends that we have to help us with advice, but then we still have to use reason to think it through.
And you mentioned that loosely and ironically, your 3 moral guides are based, as I said, ironically on the Bible. And I say this because you also mentioned a good portion of your book is about the inadequacy of religion and the Bible to act as any sort of moral guide or framework. And one thing that really stood out for me and struck me was your mention of, I hadn't realized that, and I've not even been born and brought up as a Christian. So that's part of the reason that the words ethics and morality are not there in the Bible at all.
Yeah.
And that the morality in the Bible is all about people vis-a-vis God rather than vis-a-vis each other.
Yeah. So if morality is human to human, if that's what we mean by it, the Bible is a very poor moral guide. There's a little bit in the Bible about how humans should treat other humans. There is some.
Yeah.
It'd be surprising if there wasn't, with so many authors over so many centuries. Maybe about 5% of the Bible you could say, and I didn't quantify it, but somewhere in that range. And since morality doesn't appear in the Bible and ethics doesn't appear in the Bible, then how do we know how to be a good person? You know, everyone says the Bible is the good book. Follow the Bible, you'll be a good person. How do you know? So what I did in here, and the scholar Hector Avalos helped me with this a lot. Sure. And, you know, he's a great Bible scholar. What I did was something totally new, which was from the research that I had done in a previous book called God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction. I went through the Bible and looked up the words evil and wicked. Yeah. Because if morality isn't actually in the Bible, how do you know what's good? So let's look at what's bad. What does the Bible say is bad? So evil and wicked, those two words, are roughly synonyms to each other. And sometimes there's different versions use the same words, so they're roughly synonyms. And they're translated very loosely. There's about 1,000 times in the Bible when you see evil and wicked used. About 1,000, depending which English translation you use. Most of the time, at least 90% of the time or more, evil and wicked have nothing to do with human-to-human behavior. How should I treat you? Yeah. They most often have to do with human-to-God behavior. Yeah. How should I obey and please and glorify God? So most of the time when you see the word evil, it has to do with offending God, not with hurting other human beings. It's not a moral system. Sure. And the biggies are, you know what the biggest, quote-unquote, immoral thing to do in the Bible is? What is the big sin in the Bible? I would guess disobedience, or well, that's close. It all falls under disobedience. Yeah. But the biggest one is idolatry. Idolatry. Making idols to other gods. That's all over the place. Don't make false idols. It's in the Ten Commandments. Don't make a graven image, right? Because this God was so jealous and so insecure about it, if you look at somebody else, like a possessive husband. Who wants to control his wife, and he says, I love you and I'll always love you, but if you even look sideways at another man, I'm going to burn you and I'm going to pestilence. I mean, that's all of that kind of, you know, controlling love. You know, the Bible says God is love, but it's a kind of conditional love. So idolatry is a big one. That's always struck me about monotheistic religions, you know, and my background is as a Hindu, that how Hinduism in that aspect is a bit different, that in monotheistic religions, you're right, it's a very jealous and very possessive God. And there's no other god or gods that you're meant to even minimally respect. Yeah, so, and he even calls his name. He says, my name is jealous. That's his name. You can say, hey, dear jealous, please, when you pray next time. So idolatry is a big one, but there's others in there. And like you say, disobedience, you know, not obeying. If a family has a stubborn and rebellious son who is a drunkard and a glutton, then that is an evil thing, and they should stone him to death. And they did in the Bible, all these things. Another one is mixed marriage. Interracial marriage is a big deal, especially in the Old Testament. That also struck me in your book, the chapter on that you have. Yeah, I didn't realize. And all these verses, and some of the prophet Ezra, and some of these prophets were so... One of them was so angry that he saw an Israelite married with a woman from another religion, right? A interracial or interreligious marriage. That he went up to them and he pulled out their hair and he screamed at them and he kicked them and he threw them. I mean, and he was proud of that. I mean, if you saw somebody like that on the streets today, we'd lock them up. I mean, that's how those prophets were. And so, and the point is that if the Israelites were to marry people of other religions, they'd start worshiping the wrong God, and God wouldn't get the attention he deserves, right? And another big one, almost as big as those, is the Sabbath. Not worshiping and obeying the Sabbath. There's just gobs and gobs and dozens of verses about You didn't worship the Sabbath, you are an evil, wicked person. So we see evil and wicked used most of the time in the Bible to refer to disobeying the jealous Lord. And once in a while, you see some connections with things like drunkenness or fairness. You will see it. So we can't say it's 100%.
Yeah, yeah.
But occasionally, you'll see some things that have to do with human behavior.
But Dan, Christians would say that these examples you're giving are from the Old Testament, and that the New Testament is different. You demolished that too in your book. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, first of all, if it's true that the Old Testament has no value, why don't they join us in throwing it out, right?
Yeah.
Why do they still put the Ten Commandments in front of their, schools or whatever?
Sure.
Why do they still quote from the Old Testament if they say it's outdated, right? Then yet they don't. But it's true, the New Testament is different, and in the New Testament, evil and wicked have a little bit more to do with human-to-human behavior. So in the New Testament, we still it's not more than 50%, but we still see a slightly more gentle, more peaceful shift. Although Jesus was supposed to be this great moral leader, and everyone talks, even some deists like Thomas Jefferson and Franklin, they thought Jesus had this great moral system. But if you look at it, what's there? What Jesus said was, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
Yeah.
I and the Father are one. In other words, Jesus was the Lord jealous.
Yeah.
He never denounced him.
Yeah.
If Jesus really wanted to, if the New Testament was really going to be something new and special,
And
a moral arc that really changes things, then Jesus should have come along and said, I'm sorry, I apologize for my dad. He was a jerk. He was a sexist. He was a bully. He was violent. That's the old way, and now there's a new way. Maybe I would have respected him somewhat. But you see all through the New Testament that Jesus even echoed his father's pyromania with the idea of hell and all that. And so the New Testament doesn't really get us that much closer to morality. I forgot to mention one other thing, and that is we talked about evil with idolatry and the Sabbath and interracial marriage and curses. But there are dozens of verses where God himself uses the word evil for his own actions. God says, I am bringing this evil upon you, and I'm bringing these evil things. And there's verses even in Isaiah where God said, I form the light, I create darkness, I make peace, and I create evil. And that phrase, create evil, is the same word create from Genesis and the same word evil in Genesis, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Some Christian apologists try to mitigate that verse and other verses where God is actually evil and doing evil things by saying, well, evil didn't mean moral, cosmic, metaphysical evil. It just meant calamity.
Sure.
If you read the Bible in different translations, you'll see that verse that says evil. A lot of them use evil, but some change it to woe or calamity or trouble.
Sure.
I think in an attempt to soften what looks like a pretty bad thing, God saying, I'm creating evil. But no matter what you call it, it's bad. I mean, even if you don't call it evil, God's saying, I'm doing these bad things to you. So in the New Testament, we don't see that much connection between God and the word evil. In the New Testament, evil switches to the evil one, Satan. Then we start seeing, after that, we start seeing evil is now connected not with God. God wasn't the evil person as he's described in the Old Testament. Satan is the evil person. So you see that shift in Christian theology away from God being the bad guy to Satan being the bad guy. And then suddenly, God is good.
Well, Dan, I mean, your book is really interesting on so many levels, starting off with defining morality, then going into the inadequacy of God and religion, and specifically the Bible, to give us a moral guide. But there are lots of other things in the book too. There are some very interesting thought experiments that you talk about that social scientists use that are not necessarily very well known to the outside public. There's also a great footnote about Jiminy Cricket and how that term came into being. And people, folks, I tell you that it's worth buying the book and reading the book just for that footnote.
That's a footnote.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but maybe, and if we have time, we can discuss all of that a bit too. But let's see if folks have questions for us. Yes. Katie Francis asks, if morality is a byproduct of evolution, why do humans across the planet have different notions of morality? what's considered moral here in America, for example, may not be considered moral or immoral in China.
Yeah, so that's a question of moral relativism, where you could accept one culture having an action that's bad, which in another culture would not be considered bad. And I think we can rise above moral relativism. I think people sometimes say, well, who's to tell Hitler that his actions were bad? He thought they were good. He thought he was doing a good thing. He thought it was great for the German people. So who's to say? Isn't all morality relative? And the point I'm trying to make is that we can build a natural moral philosophy that is mere morality, that looks at all of these, and the measuring stick is harm. So even though Hitler might not have admitted that what he was doing was wrong, the rest of us can use these tools, moral tools, and we can look and say, well, Hitler committed unnecessary harm. Duh. I mean, we maybe don't even have to convince Hitler that he was wrong. We can judge.
Yeah.
We have a mind that can judge and say, well, look at. So maybe some other, some other culture comes into your Western democracy and wants to still import its religious values and its culture with it. So that's a big question. Do we respect their culture and the way they treat the women? And do we respect the laws that they have? Or can we judge that culture using some yardstick? And I think the harm principle is the way we do that. So like Maryam Namazi in London, she has a group called One Law for All, which means there shouldn't be different laws for different groups of people. Yeah. Except when it comes to things that are not causing harm. They might have some cultural laws about some rituals that make no difference about whether someone's harmed or not. That's fine. Like what day of the week you should worship. Well, if they want to worship on Friday, fine. And if I want to worship on Sunday, or not at all. So if it doesn't cause any harm, if you don't see any unnecessary harm, then we can withhold judgment. But if the action is causing harm, for example, Kara Newman here in Wisconsin, the 12-year-old girl who died a horrible death on Easter Sunday from easily treatable diabetes. Her parents would not take her to the doctor because the Bible says the prayer of faith will heal the sick. Are we supposed to respect those parents? Yeah. Are we supposed to we can respect their freedom to believe, but if their actions lead to harm, Kara is dead now. She might have grown up to become a free thinker. She'd probably be in college by now. Yeah. So I think we can say, yes, they have a different culture, they have different views, but if their actions are causing harm, we as moral agents have a responsibility to at least denounce that harm, if not try to stop it.
Yeah. Just to add to your point, if I may, Dan, this Indian Nobel laureate, Amartya Sen, he argues that moral codes are actually much more universal than people think them to be, and the deviations are just cultural accretions, and they aren't that significant, and that at the foundational level, moral codes are much more universally shared than people imagine them to be.
And that's one thing I point out in this book is that mere morality applies to everyone, no matter what your religion is. For example, suppose you are looking at all these religions of the world, you're looking at this one and that one and this, and you're trying to decide which one is the best one, which one is really good. You look at that one, that one, and then you pick one. So this is a good one. What criterion are you using to determine if it's good or not? Whatever that criterion is, it's above the religion. Goodness transcends religion. And so it's no surprise that in the religions of the world we find things like peace,
absolutely,
peace and love and joy. Well, who's going to argue with that, right? Those things are not unique to any one religion. Those aren't religious values. Those are human values. So if we strip off all the non-essentials from all these religions, like how women should be treated, what day of the week you should worship, how many prayers you should say, how you should dress, how you should address your clergy, if you strip off all of that stuff that differs among religions, what are you left with? You're left with mere morality.
But Dan, the second questioner would beg to differ with you. Eon Merrick asks, without a God, why should anybody be morally opposed to the suffering of others? And adds, the Bible is the only religious text that tells people to care for strangers and stop their suffering! Exclamation point. Please respond to that.
Well, that could be debatable whether it's the only religious text that says that. Yeah. But even without religious text, who would dare claim that for the 15,000 years that my ancestors lived on the American continent, right? Before the Europeans came over here with swords and Bibles to tell us what was the real way. Who would dare claim that we didn't know how to love our families and care for each other? We didn't have fairness and altruism and goodness, and we didn't have beauty and art and love. Who would dare say that without one religion, all the rest of the groups in the world, even you know, 15,000 years ago was what? 9,000 years before the world was even created, if you're a young Earth creationist.
Yes.
So way, way back. And when Columbus landed in the Taino people, they had beautiful ethical societies. You know, every culture is different, right? Yes. So I think what we can say is that the Bible has some good in it. That's true. We can't deny it. It would be amazing if it didn't. But on balance, the Bible is more damaging. You can cherry pick, and you can find this verse here, and you can find a verse that says, God is love, and love your neighbor as yourself. Like Jesus said, the 2 commandments, right? But if you take those verses all by themselves out of context without looking at the entire picture of God's actions and words through Scripture, you see that the Bible is not a good moral guide. And you'll see that even those supposed good things in the Bible all point back to glorifying God first. That's why Jesus said the 2 commandments, first is love God, then love your neighbor, which is a totally upside down way of thinking about morality. Real morality deals with real human beings in the real world with real harm.
The next question, Dan, asks us to deal with a thicket of issues not unfamiliar with us here at FFRF, because in addition to separation of church and state and non-theism, we deal with these issues on a regular basis. But I'll let you answer this. Do atheists think abortion, euthanasia, and suicide is moral or immoral? One could argue that those things cause more harm than good. It's complicated, Dan.
Well, so we can't really ask, do atheists think, as if you and I could speak for all atheists, because there are some atheists who are anti-abortion, and there are some atheists who are anti-euthanasia. There are some. So atheism is not a moral philosophy. Atheism is simply the absence of a belief in a God. But we can answer that question by saying, yes, some atheists actually do think abortion is a good thing. Because like I talked about earlier, an amputation, or here's kind of a simple example. I think we all agree that we should not take a needle and jab it into a baby. I mean, is that a good thing to do? I mean, it's going to hurt the baby, it's going to cause harm, it's going to cause some damage. But we will take a needle and stick it into a baby to give it a life-saving injection. The baby's going to hurt, the baby's going to cry, the baby's not going to like it, is not going to understand it. But in the big picture, morality deals with overall harm, right? So looking at abortion, most atheists that I know, and I don't speak for all of them, but most of them would say that abortion is actually, and Ann Gaylor even used the word, it's a blessing. Because if you balance this woman's life and health with the children she's already raising and her choice to whether to continue her family, in most cases I think we can say, and I think even a lot of religious people and even a lot of Christians even say, there are even Catholics for choice, right? That woman's decision, she has to make that moral decision with her head on the shoulders about what causes the least amount of overall harm in her life. And that woman and I myself don't think a fetus is a human being. We think it's a developing human being. We don't think aborting a fetus is murder, although the religious right would like to make it look like it's murder. They're stuck in a kind of binary, absolutistic black and white thinking where it has to be either or, when actually most moral decisions are gray. So sure, when the baby's born and it's breathing and it's out, it's a precious thing, and we love it and we care for it, and we value babies when they're born. But especially in the first trimester, you know, way before it's born, it's not a baby, it's not a human being, it's a potential, right? But it's not. So if you view an abortion as a murder, well, then you've got this black and white mentality. But if you view a fetus as a developing potential to be, otherwise every sperm would be sacred, like it says in that Monty Python song, right? Sure. In fact, every cell in your body has that unique DNA in it. So would you trim your fingernails? Are you committing murder because you're, you know? So I know it's more complicated than that, but I say most atheists that I know do have some kind of a moral philosophy that involves less violence, less harm in the real world overall. So the question of death with dignity is the same thing. I think if you can't control your death, you can't control your life and others. But that's not my decision to make for you.
Sure.
That's your decision to think through on your own. And as long as you can see that on balance you're attempting to cause less harm than more. For example, we have the principle of self-defense. Even the most gentle, peaceful, loving, pacifist mother can turn into a raving, wild, violent animal if somebody's attacking her kids.
As you say in your book.
Yeah, so she doesn't want to cause harm. She doesn't want to be violent. And yet we do have those instincts to be violent for defensive reasons. And we would applaud that woman for jumping up out of her normal life to do this act of self-defense. And I would suggest that as much as possible, even during self-defense, we try to exercise the minimum amount of restraint to stop the harm from happening. But sometimes, who knows, in an emotional situation, you might overreact, you know.
Sure.
So did I answer the question enough?
Yes, that's very much so.
Good.
Very much. And those are the two major issues that he wanted us to address.
Okay.
The final question and message is one that is so wonderful. It's the type of thing that keeps us going week in and week out. And this is Shelley McGann, and it's a great note to end the show with. Glad to see that Ask an Atheist is back. Will you be on next week? So Dan, please tell our viewers.
Well, I guess that's not for me to answer. It's up to Bruce and the rest of the staff, but I think so. I think we're going to be, well, Bruce Johnson is our director of TV and video. I think he's saying we might be back in the main studio next week. Otherwise, we could come upstairs here again
absolutely.
and do it. But yeah, I hope so. And I'm glad you like the show, and I'm glad you're watching.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. It's such a pleasure to discuss your book. Again, it's Mere Morality, and it's available everywhere online, in bookstores, I would hope, in good bookstores, as they say.
And you can buy it from FFRF online, which actually helps the foundation.
Certainly.
All my royalties go back to the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So it's a better deal for free thought if you buy the book online.
Absolutely.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you for watching. And we would like to invite you to become a member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. You can help us in our really vital work to keep state and church separate. And as we're doing today, to educate the public about the views of non-theists. You can visit our webpage at ffrf.org, or you can telephone 800-335-4021. That's 800-335-4021.
And one way you can help FFRF and add heft to us speaking out for separation of church and state and for the rights of non-theists is by contacting government officials who violate the law. If you want to receive FFRF action alerts on your smartphone, text FFRF, that's our acronym, FFRF, to 52886. Data rates may apply. Again, that's FFRF to 52886.
So we'll see you, hopefully. We'll see you. Without faith, we have hope, I guess. Atheists have hope. Next week on another episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist.
Thanks, Dan. It was lovely chatting with you about your book.